and welcome to Haddonfield United Methodist Church. I am so glad you choose to worship with us today, wherever you are and whenever you are able. For the last couple of weeks, I had an incredible opportunity to visit my family in South Korea. Meanwhile, I was very grateful for the gift of technology for me to worship with you, regardless of my physical location or different time zone. And so I want to say you are very welcome here, whether you're local, national, or international, as we give our hearts to God who calls us and loves us first. And today we are excited to kick off our new sermon series. It's complicated, many colors of the Joseph story. It will invite us to think about our relationships in our lives, especially in family dynamics, through the story of Joseph. So today, Pastor Chris will bring us the message, God bless this mess, with Genesis chapter 37. So let's open our worship together with the praise of our God, with gratitude and thanksgiving.
I was blind, now I'm seeing color. I was dead, now I'm living forever. I had failed, but you were my Redeemer. I've been blessed beyond all measure. I was lost, now I'm found by the Father. I've been changed from a ruin to treasure. I've been given a hope and a future. I've been blessed beyond all measure. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing, letting go and trusting when I cannot see. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing. Surely every season you are good to me. Oh, oh, you are good to me. Oh, oh, you are good to me. You were there in the valley of shadows. You were there in the depth of my sorrow. You're my strength, my hope for tomorrow. I've been blessed beyond all measure. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing, letting go and trusting when I cannot see. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing. Surely every season you are good to me. Oh, oh, you are good to me. Oh, oh, you are good to me. Surely your goodness pursues me. Surely your heart is before me. I will remember your mercies all my days, through every storm and gale. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing, letting go and trusting when I cannot see. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing. Surely every season you are good to me. I am counting every blessing, counting every blessing, letting go and trusting when I cannot see. I am counting every blessing. I thought by now they'd fall, but you have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last, your words will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed me yet.
I've seen you move, you've moved the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. I see you do it again.
Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you've never failed me.
Thank you so much for worshiping with us today. I want to quickly update you on what is happening in the life of church and resource you with faith resources to help you grow in your relationships with God and with each other. This week, we resume producing our weekly small group guide called the Connect Guide. You can find our small group guide at haddonfieldemc.org or Haddonfield EMC mobile app for your small group discussion or personal devotion. Also, I'd like to highlight our daily reflection and invite you to check out our daily reflection to feed your faith on a daily basis. This is written by over 20 of our excellent contributors, and if you follow the blog at haddonfieldemc.org/daily reflections, it will be automatically delivered to your mailbox every morning from Monday through Friday to start your day with new inspiration. Last but not least, we invite you to be a part of God's mission by sharing your resources with us, which makes our ministry possible. You can give your weekly offering, tithe, or mission offerings online by texting GIVE to the number on the screen. So I want to say thank you for your generosity in sharing your life with us in many ways for God's mission in and beyond our community. So let's prepare our hearts in prayer before we listen to the Word of God prepared for us today. Loving and gracious God, thank you so much for your loving presence among us and in our lives. Oh, please open our hearts and mind at this moment as we listen to your voice, which is tender and soft, and help us to be faithful disciples of Jesus each and every day. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hi there. Thanks for joining us for this special online-only service. Today, as we come together at the beginning of the month of February, I'm longing for this year to be a little more simple. Wouldn't it be nice if life were just a little bit more simple? Why do things have to be so complicated? Have you felt that way? Why do the people in our lives have to be so complicated? You know, have you ever felt like, just why can't people get it together? Why can't people around me value what I do a little more, be a little more reliable, or care the way that we care? Why can't things just go right for once? You know, one of the experiences I had last year, 2021, as we began to come out of a long period of shelter in place and of quarantine, was that while I was excited to get back to things and to get back to in-person things and go to restaurants and enjoy good weather, one observation I made was that I realized that many of the people and many of the interactions that I was having that I hadn't had for almost a year were a little more complicated than I remembered. That people have their own issues and things don't always go the way that we want them to go. Communication doesn't always happen the way we want it to happen. And for a year, when we were sheltered in place, we curated our own lives. We were in communication basically with the people we wanted to be in communication with. And then when you begin to go out in the world again, in the grocery store, in the bank, and restaurants, and church, and family meetings, we realize that, you know, humans can be kind of messy. We disappoint one another. We hurt one another. We say things that wound one another. And I come back to that sentiment. Why can't things just be a little simpler and not so complicated? Well, I know I'm not alone, and I know that you, in one way or another, at one point in time, have wrestled with relationships in your life that are just a little more messy than you wish that they were. And so in preparing for the month of February, Pastor JiSun and I thought that there is an amazing story in the Bible that speaks to our human experience of messiness, of complicated relationships, but more to what God does in the midst of all this. So today, I want to look at this very, very beautiful and powerful story of Joseph found in Genesis chapters 37 all the way to chapter 50. And I want to remind you that this is one of the core stories of the Torah, of the law of the Jewish people, of the Israelite people. And this is a founding father's story. This is an origin story of their nation. It is a part of their law. It is the story of Joseph. And so I want to read this to you, Genesis 37, 1 to 4. I'm going to skip to verses 12 to 28. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him. They could not speak peaceably to him. Skipping to verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing their flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of this dreamer and his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with the sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Wow, what a kind of messed up story, right? What brothers try to kill their own brother and sell him into slavery, knowing it will break their father's heart, right? Here's the real question. Why is this in the Bible? Why is this in a story about God and faith and faithfulness? You see, I want to look at this story not only today, but in the coming weeks, because the power of the Joseph story is that it has a transparency and an honesty that we don't always include in our modern storytelling, how we tell the stories of our families and of our heroes. It's honest. about the messiness, the complicated nature of families, and how God works in the midst of all of it. Now, the story in Genesis 37 starts off by saying, this is the story of Jacob. It's kind of saying, this is our family story. Now, remember a few things. If you start earlier in the book of Genesis, this is the origin story of the people called Israel. Now, Israel was the name given to Jacob when he wrestled with an angel all by himself one night through the early hours of the morning. And before the angel let him go, Jacob said, "You have to bless me." And when the angel touched his hip, he was wounded, but he was given a new name, a blessing. And it was said, "You have a new name, which is now Yisrael," which means you have wrestled with God and survived. And so Israel is Jacob, who is the grandson of Abraham. Abraham was the first ancestor who formed a covenant with God. And the covenant that Abraham formed with God was that Abraham and his descendants would be faithful to God, to serve, to worship, and to revere and love God. And in turn, God would always protect, guide, bless Abraham and Abraham's descendants. And God's covenant was also not only one of blessing, but that God would bless Abraham with descendants as many as the stars in the sky and the sands by the sea. So Abraham's son Isaac had Jacob and Esau. Jacob becomes Israel, and this is the story of Israel. It is the founding of a nation. And Israel, Jacob, had 12 sons to 4 different mothers. The first was Leah, a woman that he didn't really want to marry, but was tricked into marrying her before he got to marry the love of his life, Rachel. And both of them had maidservants, which culturally was acceptable in that day, that he also had children. So his 12 children to the 4 mothers, it was complicated. Can you imagine? 12 brothers, different mothers. They would side with probably their blood brothers, and there would be animosity. This is the story of Jacob. It's pretty complicated, and if you think it's messy now, it gets even a little messier. I want to point out a few other tidbits about this story. What comes right before this in chapter 36 is a story about Reuben. In what I just read, Reuben kind of comes to the rescue and saves Joseph from being killed by his brothers. But Reuben is the oldest. He's the oldest son. He's the son of Leah, the first wife. And Reuben inherited the birthright, which means he would have gotten all of his father's wealth and assets. And he was also the head brother. He was in charge of everyone. But Reuben did a bad thing. He slept with his father's concubine, with the servant of his mother. And so, according to the Midrash, which are ancient rabbinic commentaries on the Torah, these writings say that Reuben was stripped of his birthright. His father took away his role as the head brother, took away his inheritance, his legal right to get everything that was his dad's, and he gave it to Joseph. And so that coat, which we've always said in the church, the coat of many colors, that it's really a robe. And in Hebrew, the term is kitonet pasim, which means the robe down to the palm. It would have been a royal robe or a robe that signaled power, authority. And so really this robe was the giving of the birthright of Reuben, who did a bad thing. He was unfaithful to his family, unfaithful to his father, and unfaithful to their covenant with God. And Jacob gave that birthright to his son Joseph, the 11th brother. So now the 11th brother, the second to the youngest, is in charge. And he's wearing a sign that always reminds his brothers that he's in charge. Long sleeves, kind of like royalty. Now, the part that I left out in the reading of this in verses 5 through 11 is that Joseph has dreams. And in his dreams, he has his brothers and his family bow down and worship him. So all of these things, the conferring of the oldest authority on the second to the youngest, the fact that Joseph gives a bad report of his brothers to his dad and gets them in trouble, and the fact that then he walks around and talks about how he's having dreams of grandeur, that his family will serve him, he earned the hatred and the resentment of his brothers. It's messy. Is Joseph a good guy? He's kind of naive, right? He's kind of arrogant a little bit in this story. And are the brothers bad? Well, if I can remind you, the kingdom of Judah is where Jesus went to the temple in Jerusalem. The word Judah became an entire kingdom when Israel divided later in history. These names are the famous names of Israel. And yet here, they're capable of hatred, of deceit, of bad things. You know, one thing I love about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, is that a little different than modern storytelling, the characters are all messy. The good guys or the good characters usually are deeply flawed and do bad things. And the bad characters, you can sympathize with them. You can feel for them. You can see good in them. If we look at our own stories today, our superhero stories, we like the good guys to be good and the villains to be bad. And we like sort of black and white storytelling, but the Torah reminds us of a few things. And so I got 5 points from this story that I want to explore not just today, but in the coming weeks. The first is that everyone's family is messy. Have you ever felt maybe embarrassed of a relationship or a member of your family, or maybe your own standing in your family, and you look at other people around you and think, oh, why can't I just have his parents? Or why can't I have a sibling that I get along with like she does and her siblings? And why do my family have to be so crude or so extreme? The reality is the Torah tells the story of Israel. Hey folks, your ancestors, they were pretty complicated. They were pretty messy. They were jealous. They were anxious. They were spiteful. They were capable of lying. They were arrogant. They were naive. Everyone's family is messy. And I would say all relationships have a level of messiness. Now, there's another theme I want to introduce in this story, and that is a theme that we see throughout the Bible of how God works in the world. And it is found in this phrase: the greater will serve the lesser. Now, let's just back up real quickly. When Jacob was in his mother's womb with his twin brother Esau, with whom he fought bitterly in his life, physically as well as emotionally, when the twins were in their mother's womb, it said that someone prophesied over their mother and said, the greater will serve the lesser. What that meant was that Esau, who was strong and handsome and hairy and was a bowman and a hunter and an athlete, ultimately, he lost his birthright to his younger, weaker, more emotional, artistic brother Jacob. And Jacob would take up the covenant with God and Esau would part ways. We see the same theme coming up here with Joseph, that he is the 11th brother and ultimately the others in the dream serve him. One of the ways that God works is that we like to think that the strong win and the lesser serve the greater. But here we see that God redeems things in a way that those who are in the bottom end up on the top. And God works in brokenness, in weakness, in marginality to show that strength comes from God and not from us. You know, there was actually a very famous rabbi who taught about this a lot. His name was Yeshua HaNazaret, Jesus of Nazareth. He said, the last will be first, and the first will be last. The greater will serve the lesser. We'll get to that in the coming weeks. The next 3 points are these: that faithfulness yields blessing. Faithfulness yields blessing. Joseph in this story is faithful. Jacob in this story is faithful. Abraham was faithful, and in their faithfulness, God blesses. Doesn't mean that bad things don't happen, but for Joseph, God's blessing in his faithfulness, even though he provokes his brothers, he's a little naive, a little arrogant, he's faithful and God protects him. And then the converse is true also, that unfaithfulness always ends in disaster. Unfaithfulness always brings disaster. Even when we are justified, Reuben's unfaithfulness meant that he lost his birthright. The unfaithfulness of the brothers put them in a really bad position a little later in the story. And every time the people of God stray from the covenant and what God has put before them, when we are unfaithful, it's not that we are punished, but unfaithfulness itself leads to disaster. The Apostle Paul said, the wages of sin is death. When we seek ourselves and harm others, hurt others, break our vows, it ends up in disaster. But here is the beautiful part of the Joseph story and why I believe it is a part of the Torah and the law of the people of Israel, is that no matter what, God always works toward redemption. Judah is a bad guy in this story, but Judah is the name of the kingdom where the presence of God is later. Israel himself is a complicated man, but he becomes the head of a nation. God uses brokenness to work toward redemption. On Christmas Eve, in the sermon here in the church, I shared my own opinion that we're living in a very historically significant moment. Not just because of the pandemic, but also I believe that we are living through a reckoning with history, with racial inequality and injustices in our nation and in the world. And we're seeing all kinds of movements in the world, and the Me Too movement and cancel culture, and people are rethinking how we remember and honor our history. And there are debates about names on institutions and statues. And one of the things I'm seeing more and more is what I would call as purity culture, where we are purifying our social circles, meaning if people don't agree with us, then they have to be extricated from our lives because we don't want to associate with people who are on the wrong side of opinion or of value or of history. And what happens is people on all sides of political spectrums are purifying their lives. They're separating their relationships and their families. They're distancing themselves from people who are ideologically impure or incongruent with their thinking. But when we purify, when we shut people off and when we cut people out and when we refuse to talk, what happens is we limit the primary actor in the Genesis story, God. God works towards reconciliation and restoration. In this Joseph story, in the coming chapters, we are going to see how naturally this is a story of disaster and of family chaos and of lying and of murder. And yet God is working to restore and redeem in ways that people could never imagine. And so today, I want to invite you to think about the messiness in your own life, the messiness in your family, the messiness at work, the messiness among your friends, people who have parted ways, people who have distanced one another, people who have hurt us. And now I want you to think about how our actions limit the possibility for restoration and reconciliation. As we move forward in this series, It's Complicated, the many colors of the Joseph story, I want us to begin to open up our mind to how we have compassion on the messiness of our own lives. We don't have to hide or be afraid or be shameful or be embarrassed, because everyone's families are messy at some level, and God works in our midst. Also, I'm hoping that we can open our imagination for what God can do in the middle of the brokenness of our lives. Things don't have to be perfect. Your marriage doesn't have to be perfect. Your relationship with your partner, your spouse, your friend, your children, your colleagues, they don't have to be perfect for God to do a work in them and for God to do a work in you. But what we are called to do is to believe in restoration and to take a step in that direction. What step are you being called to take this week that moves towards trust in God, who can restore the messiness and who blesses us despite our own faults, failures, frailties? Again, the Apostle Paul said, "In my weakness, I am made strong." He said, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." And who is Christ? Christ is the Redeemer of God found in Genesis. May you, my friend, be very deeply blessed in your mess, in my mess, in the mess that we find ourselves in the world. And may God be at work to heal our wounds, to give us a vision of hope and of love, and to do an amazing thing. And may we strive for the more excellent way, which is God's way, the way of love. I'm so grateful that you have joined us in our service today. And I pray that God will bless you. I invite you to share this service, subscribe to our YouTube page to help us get the word out, the ministries that we're doing here. I also invite you to support us financially so we can continue to minister to people in this region and far beyond. And I pray that you find God's blessing in your mess. And let's seek to be faithful to the God of restoration and the God of love. Hope to see you soon. Take care.
Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence.